Why did the hallway feel louder the moment the door closed behind her? Commander Riley Keene noticed it before fear had time to form. The way sound thickened. The way air stopped moving. The way silence wasn't empty, but watchful. She stood still for half a second, towel folded over one arm, gym bag in the other, listening to the echo of footsteps that weren't hers. She didn't turn yet. She let the moment reveal itself. The recovery wing had always been quiet after hours. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't accidental. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, uneven, one of them flickering like a warning no one bothered to fix. The corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant layered over something older, something scrubbed, not cleaned. Riley had chosen this place deliberately. Not because she was careless. Because patterns lived here. She moved with the ease of someone who didn't rush. Someone who knew rushing gave power away. Her posture stayed neutral, ordinary. Anyone watching would see just another officer ending a long day, not a woman measuring exits, distances, angles. Then the footsteps came again. For this time. Not cautious, not hesitant, confident, familiar with the space. That was when Riley turned. They filled the hallway without apology, blocking more than occupying. Smiles that weren't friendly. Eyes that didn't bother hiding where they lingered. One of them shut the door behind them, not hard, not dramatic, just enough to make a point. Riley felt the shift inside her, the moment when observation ended and calculation began. She didn't back away. She didn't speak. She let them think her stillness meant uncertainty. That mistake would cost them everything. "You're not supposed to be here," one of them said casually, like a rule he'd invented and enforced before. Riley met his gaze, calm, steady, unimpressed. "I know exactly where I am," she replied. That seemed to amuse them. They stepped closer, not all at once. A practice spread, one near the lockers, one lingering behind, one just close enough to invade space without touching, and one who lifted a phone, its screen lighting the dim hallway with a cold, intrusive glow. Riley felt something old stir in her chest, not panic, not anger. Recognition. She'd seen this formation before. Different country, different uniforms, same intent. Her voice stayed level, put the phone down. The man laughed softly, or what? Riley didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, let the weight of the question settle. "Or you document your own lives falling apart," she said. That was when one of them reached for her. And that was the moment the story changed. There was no scream, no chaos, no cinematic flourish. Just motion, fast, precise, final. Riley's body responded before emotion could interfere. Training took over, not rage, not fear, but muscle memory refined by years of survival where hesitation meant death. A wrist controlled, balance broken, a body redirected into hard tile with enough force to remove fight, not life. Another lunged. He never reached her. A sharp breath, a misstep, a collapse that sounded louder than it was. The phone hit the floor. Still recording. The hallway froze. What had been confidence turned into confusion. What had been dominance collapsed into disbelief. No one spoke. No one needed to. Riley stood barefoot on cold tile, breathing steady, eyes scanning, posture relaxed in the way only someone fully in control could manage. "Back away," she said quietly. One of them obeyed instantly. Another didn't move at all. The last bolted, panic overriding pride, but he didn't make it far. Riley redirected him with the same economy of motion. No cruelty, no excess, just enough. When it was over, the silence felt different. Not threatening. Exposed. Riley bent down, picked up the phone, and stopped the recording. She checked the file, timestamp intact, audio clear, faces visible. Evidence. She dressed calmly while they sat where they'd fallen, shaken, breathing hard, the reality of consequences finally dawning. By the time base security arrived, Riley was standing upright, composed, phone in hand. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply presented her identification. The room changed instantly. Rank was what stunned them. Authority was. The duty NCO's face drained as he read the clearance level twice, then a third time. "Commander Keene," he said carefully. "Yes," Riley replied. The recording played without commentary. No edits, no excuses. Just truth. Orders followed quickly after that. Detainment, isolation, notifications sent up a chain that suddenly moved faster than it ever had before. Riley didn't watch them being taken away. Her work was only beginning. She returned to her office before dawn and opened the sealed folder she'd carried across the country, the one that had brought her here, the one no one had known about. She uploaded the video, filed the report, activated a protocol most bases never wanted invoked. By sunrise, the system had started to turn on itself. Statements appeared, quiet ones, long-delayed ones, files recovered that had been lost, names that surfaced again and again, always adjacent, never central until now. This wasn't an incident. It was a structure. At 700, Riley stood in front of the base commander's desk and laid it all out, not with anger, with clarity. "You didn't know," she said calmly, "because you didn't look." By noon, 3 careers were effectively over. By nightfall, the base understood something fundamental had shifted. No speeches were given. No announcements made. But the women walked differently. Straighter. Quieter. Watching. Waiting. Riley stayed just long enough to ensure the changes weren't symbolic, procedures rewritten, oversight installed, transfers frozen, accountability enforced. Then she packed her duffel. No farewell. No recognition. She left the way she'd arrived, unnoticed by most. But not by the ones who mattered. Because sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits. And when it acts, it doesn't destroy people. It dismantles systems. And sometimes dignity doesn't scream. It simply acts. Why did the whispers start before the sun came up? Riley noticed it while pouring her first cup of coffee, not the sound itself, but the absence of it when she entered the room. Conversations didn't stop abruptly. They thinned, bent, changed direction. People learned how to speak without being overheard, and bases like this were experts at that kind of silence. She stood by the counter, steam rising from the mug, eyes unfocused, listening anyway. Something had shifted. The men from the recovery wing were gone from their usual places. No familiar laughter near the lockers. No casual swagger near the auxiliary gym. Absences spoke louder than announcements ever could. Riley felt the weight of it settle in her chest, not satisfaction, not relief, but responsibility. Because when systems crack, they don't always collapse cleanly. Sometimes they lash out. Her temporary office was already lit when she arrived. Someone had been in there overnight, not intruding, preparing. A stack of files waited on her desk, neatly aligned. No note, no explanation, just compliance. She didn't touch them yet. Instead, she logged into her terminal and pulled up the base's internal climate logs. 2 years' worth. Complaints categorized as informal. Reports flagged as resolved, without resolution notes. Transfers marked personal reasons that clustered around the same units, the same instructors, the same months. Patterns again. Riley exhaled slowly. This wasn't going to be a single reckoning. It never was. A knock came at the door. Soft, careful. She didn't answer immediately. The knock came again, hesitant this time. "Enter." The door opened just enough for a young corporal to step inside. Female, early 20s, Uniform pressed too precisely, like she was bracing for inspection rather than conversation. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her, knuckles pale. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I was told there's an open intake now." Riley closed the file on her screen and turned fully toward her, not imposing, not distant, present. "Yes," she said, "there is." The corporal hesitated. Her eyes flicked once toward the door, then back. "Is it anonymous?" "It can be," Riley replied, "but it doesn't have to be." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, heavy. "I don't know if what happened to me counts," the corporal finally said. "It wasn't," she stopped, swallowed. "It wasn't what people think of when they hear the word." Riley nodded once. "Most of the time it is." That was enough. The story came out in pieces, not linear, moments instead of scenes, being reassigned suddenly, being told she was too sensitive, being warned, quietly, by another woman to avoid certain places at certain times. Nothing she could point to alone, everything that added up when laid side by side. Riley listened without interrupting, took notes without reacting. The corporal's voice steadied as she spoke, like something unclenching inside her chest. When she finished, Riley thanked her, not formally, not perfunctorily. Sincerely. As the door closed behind her, Riley sat back and let herself feel it for a moment. The weight, the anger that wanted to surface and didn't deserve the wheel. She learned long ago that rage burned hot and fast, but discipline endured. By midday, 3 more statements had come in, 2 anonymous, 1 not. By evening, the intake inbox was full. Riley worked through it methodically, cross-referencing names, mapping overlaps, highlighting omissions. Every story reinforced the same truth. No one had needed to give explicit permission for harm to flourish. All that had been required was indifference. At 1900, she was summoned to the base commander's office. Colonel Keating looked older than he had that morning. Not tired, aged, like a man whose reflection had stopped cooperating. He didn't offer her a seat. She didn't need one. "I've reviewed your initial findings," he said, fingers steepled on the desk. "This is extensive." "It's incomplete," Riley replied evenly. He grimaced. "I won't pretend this is easy to hear." "It wasn't easy to live with either," she said. Keating nodded slowly. "You're reopening cases that were considered closed." "They were never resolved," Riley said. "They were filed away." A pause. "There will be resistance." "There already is." He studied her then, really looked. "You could have handled the incident quietly. Disciplinary action, transfers, it would have been cleaner." Riley met his gaze. Clean isn't the same as right. The words hung there, not accusatory, factual. Keating sighed. "You're forcing this base to confront itself." "Yes," Riley said, "that's the assignment." When she left his office, the sky was already dark. The training yard buzzed with evening routines, cadence calls drifting through the air like background noise to something larger. Riley walked past it all without slowing. She headed back toward the recovery wing. Not inside. Just close enough to observe. The lights were on now, brighter than before. Maintenance crews moved through with clipboards and tools, cameras being adjusted, locks replaced. A visible response. Necessary but not sufficient. A figure stood nearby, watching from a distance. Riley recognized him instantly. Master Sergeant Grayson. The kind of senior enlisted who knew where every body was buried, metaphorically and otherwise. He didn't approach at first. She didn't invite him. Eventually he spoke. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Commander." "I don't stir," Riley said. "I expose." Grayson snorted softly. "Same result." She glanced at him. "You've been here a long time." "Long enough." "Then you've seen this before." He didn't answer right away. His eyes followed the maintenance crew. "I've seen people try to fix things by moving problems around." "And did it work?" No, he admitted. It just taught the wrong people how to hide better. Riley nodded. That's what I thought. He shifted his weight. You know they'll come after you for this. Not directly, paper cuts, delays, complaints. They already are, Riley said. And you're staying. For now. Grayson studied her for a moment longer. Then he did something unexpected. He saluted. Not sharply, not ceremonially. Respectfully. Riley returned it without comment. That night she reviewed the footage again, not because she needed to, but because context mattered. The way voices changed when they thought no one important was watching, the casual confidence, the expectation of silence. She muted the audio halfway through. Not because it was difficult, but because she didn't need to hear it again to remember why she was here. At 300, she drafted her next directive. External Review Board, independent oversight, mandatory recertification of leadership, protected reporting channels with real consequences for retaliation. She sent it up the chain and leaned back in her chair, eyes closing briefly. She felt tired then, not physically, emotionally. The kind of tired that came from carrying other people's stories without dropping them. But beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve. Because this wasn't about one hallway, or one night, or one base. It was about what happened when silence was mistaken for consent. And Riley Keene had built her career on correcting that assumption. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. Riley opened her eyes. The work wasn't done. Not even close. Why did the pressure rise the moment the investigation became official? Riley felt it before anyone said a word. The emails arrived first, carefully worded, professionally polite, heavy with concern, requests for clarification, questions about scope, suggestions framed as help. None of them challenged her authority outright. They didn't have to. Resistance, she knew, rarely announced itself honestly. It dressed as cooperation until it found leverage. She read every message once, then archived them. Outside her office window, the base moved like nothing had changed. Formations marched, vehicles rolled, orders were followed. From a distance it looked functional, healthy even. That illusion had fooled a lot of people for a long time. It wouldn't fool her. By mid-morning, the first formal interview began. A lieutenant this time, male, competent on paper, nervous in person. He sat stiffly in the chair across from Riley's desk, hands folded too tight, eyes darting every time footsteps passed the door. This is just a routine climate review, she said calmly. Answer honestly. He nodded too quickly. Of course. The answers came rehearsed at first. Vague acknowledgments, general support for professionalism, a firm belief in the chain of command. Riley let him talk, let the script play out. She knew when to wait. Eventually, the pauses grew longer. I never saw anything myself, he said finally, but people talked. What people? Riley asked. He hesitated. The women, junior enlisted mostly. And what did they say? That certain areas were better avoided, after hours, that it was easier not to push. Riley leaned back slightly. Did you ask why? He looked down. No, ma'am. Why not? He swallowed. Because I didn't want to know. There it was. Riley didn't react. She wrote a single note, then looked up. Thank you for your honesty. Relief flickered across his face, then uncertainty. He stood, saluted awkwardly, and left. The door closed softly behind him. Riley stared at the empty chair for a moment longer than necessary. Not wanting to know was its own decision. By noon, the rumors had reached her. Not directly, they never did. They filtered through sideways comments, sudden stiffness in meetings, the way certain officers stopped making eye contact. She was being called aggressive, overreaching, political, a liability. She welcomed it. Those labels meant she was close to something real. At lunch, she sat alone in the corner of the dining facility, not because she was unwelcome, but because people didn't know how to sit near someone who might ask questions later. She ate slowly, deliberately, watching the room. 2 tables over, a group of junior enlisted women sat together. Their conversation was muted, heads bent close. One of them glanced at Riley, then looked away quickly. A few minutes later, a folded note slid across Riley's table. No name, just a unit number and a time. Riley finished her meal and stood. The meeting place was a small outdoor maintenance shed near the edge of the training yard. Neutral, unremarkable, the kind of place no one paid attention to. 3 women were already there when Riley arrived. They didn't stand at attention. They didn't salute. They just waited. "I didn't know if you'd come," one of them said quietly. "I said the intake was open," Riley replied. "That means I show up too." They spoke in turns, not interrupting, filling gaps for one another when words failed. One had transferred twice in 18 months. Another had been labeled difficult after refusing to laugh at certain jokes. The third hadn't been touched, but had been warned bluntly by a male peer who didn't like what he was seeing. Riley listened. The shed grew warm as the afternoon sun shifted. Sweat gathered at the base of her neck, but she didn't move, didn't rush. These stories deserved space. When they finished, one of them asked the question Riley knew was coming. "What happens to us now?" Riley met her eyes. "You're protected." "For how long?" "As long as I'm here," Riley said. Then, after a pause, "and longer than that if I do my job right." They nodded, not relieved but steadier. That night the pushback escalated. A formal complaint landed in Riley's inbox just after 2100, filed anonymously, accusing her of inappropriate conduct, excessive force, and personal vendettas. It cited the recovery wing incident, carefully omitting context. Riley read it once. Then she forwarded it to legal with the full video attached. Let the truth do the talking. She didn't sleep much, not because she was afraid, but because she could feel the system straining. Old habits resisting change, people scrambling to protect themselves, not the mission. At 400, she took a walk along the perimeter fence. The air was cool, quiet, almost peaceful. Beyond the wire, the world slept, unaware of the small war being fought inside institutional walls. She thought about the woman who had slid the note across the table, about the corporal who had spoken first, about the countless others who hadn't yet found the courage or safety to speak. This was the hardest part. Not confrontation. Endurance. By the time morning briefing began, Riley had already finalized her next move. She stood at the back of the room as unit leaders filed in. Conversations hushed when they noticed her. The colonel cleared his throat and began the agenda, but Riley could feel the tension coiled tight. Halfway through, he paused. "Commander Keene has an update." All eyes turned. Riley stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize. She spoke like someone delivering weather conditions, facts that didn't care how you felt about them. "Effective immediately," she said. "All informal complaints are suspended. Any report related to harassment, coercion, or hostile environments will be treated as formal. Retaliation of any kind will be grounds for removal from leadership positions." A murmur rippled through the room. Riley continued. "External investigators will conduct interviews, not your staff, not your peers. Compliance is mandatory." One officer shifted uncomfortably. Another frowned. A third stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Riley saw all of it. "This is not punishment," she said. "It's correction." When she finished, no one clapped. No one spoke. The colonel nodded once and moved on. But the damage or the repair had been done. Later that afternoon, Master Sergeant Grayson found her again. This time, he didn't bother with distance. "You're making enemies," he said. Riley glanced up from her screen. Good. He studied her for a long moment. You know why they're scared? Because accountability doesn't negotiate, she replied. Because, he corrected gently, they thought silence meant safety, for them. Riley closed her laptop. Silence only ever protected the wrong people. Grayson exhaled slowly. You're not going to be popular. I didn't come to be liked. He nodded. No, you came to finish something. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the base lights flickered on, Riley reviewed the growing stack of evidence. Statements, logs, messages pulled from archived systems. Each piece alone looked survivable. Together, they formed something undeniable. A pattern. And patterns, once named, couldn't hide anymore. Riley leaned back in her chair and allowed herself one quiet moment of reflection. Not pride, not victory. Resolve. Because the hardest phase was still ahead. The phase where truth stopped being abstract and started costing people their careers. And Riley Keene had never believed accountability was supposed to be comfortable. It was supposed to be corrective. And it was coming. Why did the room feel smaller the moment the investigators arrived? Riley sensed it before the first badge was checked at the gate. The air on base had changed again, not with fear this time, but with calculation. Doors closed more carefully. Conversations lowered another octave. People who had once leaned comfortably on routine now leaned on caution. External oversight had a way of doing that. The review team arrived without ceremony. No convoy, no announcement. 3 civilians in neutral attire and 1 uniformed legal officer who didn't wear unit patches. They moved like people who had learned not to draw attention, which meant they drew plenty. Riley met them in a windowless conference room near admin. She didn't brief them with emotion. She didn't frame a narrative. She handed over folders, drives, access credentials. Everything you need is there, she said, and everything you don't expect will be there too. One of the investigators, a woman with tired eyes and a pen she didn't stop clicking, looked up. How bad is it? Riley paused, just long enough to choose precision over comfort. It's thorough, she said. That afternoon, the interviews began in earnest. Not the surface-level ones, not the polite check-ins. These were recorded, documented, structured, the kind that didn't allow people to hide behind tone or intent, the kind that cared less about how something was meant and more about how it landed. Riley wasn't present for most of them. That was intentional. She knew her presence could influence answers. She stayed in her office instead, tracking timelines, cross-referencing testimony as it came in. By evening, the first cracks appeared. A senior NCO contradicted himself on record. An officer admitted to discouraging a report because it would complicate staffing. A training supervisor acknowledged knowing about that hallway, but claimed it wasn't his responsibility. Riley marked the timestamps and moved on. Responsibility had been everyone's excuse for too long. The first open defiance came just before sunset. An email from a department head, blunt, unfiltered, and sent to the wrong distribution list, accused the review process of undermining morale and targeting good people over misunderstandings. He CC'd the colonel. He CC'd legal. He, Riley. She read it once. Then she forwarded it to the investigators as supplemental evidence. Let it stand exactly as written. That night, Riley sat alone in her office long after the building emptied. The hum of the lights felt louder without voices to absorb it. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling, letting herself feel the fatigue she'd been postponing. This part always weighed the most. Not the confrontation. The waiting. She thought about the women who had spoken, about the ones who hadn't yet, about the cost of telling the truth in a system that preferred quiet efficiency over discomfort. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for not pretending you didn't see us." Riley stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed back a single word. "Seen." She set the phone face down and returned to work. The following morning, the base commander called an emergency leadership meeting. Mandatory attendance. Closed doors. Riley stood near the back as officers filed in, faces set, shoulders tight. Colonel Keating looked like he hadn't slept. "This review will continue," he said without preamble. "Fully, cooperatively, any interference will be treated as obstruction." A hand went up. "What about due process?" someone asked. Keating didn't hesitate. "That's exactly what this is." Eyes shifted, a few jaws clenched. Riley watched it all, expression unreadable. After the meeting, Grayson caught up to her in the hallway. He looked conflicted, torn between loyalty and relief. "They're rattled," he said. "They should be," Riley replied. "You're cutting deep." "I'm cutting accurately." He nodded slowly. "You ever wonder why it took an outsider?" Riley considered the question. Because insiders adapt to survive, outsiders adapt to correct. Grayson exhaled, fair. By midweek, the first administrative actions were taken. Temporary relief from duty. Leadership roles reassigned pending review. Access revoked quietly, efficiently. No announcements. But everyone noticed. The training yard felt different. Less noise, less bravado, more eyes watching who spoke to whom. Riley walked through it all without pause, aware of the attention but not owned by it. She stopped once briefly, when a young private stepped aside to let her pass. "Ma'am," the private said softly, "my sister's thinking about enlisting." Riley looked at her, and I want to tell her it's safe." Riley held her gaze. "Tell her it's worth protecting." The private nodded, something steadying in her posture. That afternoon, one of the investigators requested a private conversation. They sat across from each other, in the same conference room as before. "You're aware," the investigator said carefully, "that this will expand beyond this base." Riley nodded. "It already has. Names are coming up elsewhere." "I expected that." The investigator studied her. "You won't be popular." Riley almost smiled, almost. "I didn't accept this assignment to be remembered fondly." Silence settled between them, not awkward, respectful. "You're doing something important," the investigator said finally, "but it won't feel like that every day." Riley stood. "It never does." That night the storm broke. A local news outlet caught wind of an internal review involving misconduct. No details, just enough to ignite speculation. Phones rang. Public affairs scrambled. Command issued a statement that said everything and nothing. Riley watched it unfold from a distance. Exposure wasn't the goal. Correction was. But she knew the difference was academic to people who feared consequences. By dawn, the base felt like it was holding its breath. Riley stood at her window as the first light crept over the perimeter fence. She thought about the moment in the hallway days earlier, how quickly certainty had turned into panic, how systems, like people, revealed their true nature under pressure. She didn't regret her choices, but she felt the weight of them, because accountability didn't end with reports or removals. It ended only when the environment changed. And that kind of change took time. The investigators would leave eventually. Orders would expire. Riley would move on to the next assignment. What mattered was what remained. She closed her eyes briefly, then straightened. There was still work to do, and she intended to see it through. Why did the apologies start arriving only after consequences became unavoidable? Riley noticed the shift not in tone, but in timing. Messages that had been absent for years suddenly appeared, carefully worded acknowledgments, expressions of concern that would have meant something earlier. Regret offered too late to undo damage, but early enough to hope it might soften outcomes. She read them all. She responded to none. The investigation had moved past the phase where sentiment mattered. Now it was about record, responsibility, and repair. The review board convened on the fifth morning, not in a ceremonial room, not beneath flags or portraits, but in a plain space with neutral walls and no symbols of rank beyond what people carried in themselves. That was intentional. Stripped environments made it harder to hide behind authority. Riley sat off to the side, not at the table. She wasn't there to prosecute or defend. She was there to ensure continuity, to make sure nothing disappeared between statements and conclusions. The first witness was a senior training officer, decorated, respected, a reputation built over decades. He spoke confidently at first, recounting schedules and metrics, readiness numbers and performance improvements. He was good at this. He'd been speaking upward his whole career. Then the questions narrowed. Were you aware of repeated informal complaints involving your unit? Yes. And what action did you take? I addressed behavior when it was brought to my attention. Documented. A pause. No. Why not? Another pause, longer. I believed it could be handled internally. Handled, the word landed flat in the quiet room. Riley watched his hands tighten slightly on the table, not from guilt, at least not yet, but from the realization that what had once protected him was now exposed. Good intentions weren't a defense anymore. One by one, the testimonies layered. Some contradicted, some overlapped, some quietly corroborated stories that had lived in isolation for too long. The board listened, asked follow-ups, requested records that, inconveniently, no longer existed. Patterns emerged. The board recessed just after noon. Riley stepped outside into the narrow strip of sunlight between buildings and let the air hit her face. The base felt suspended in something between past and future, unsure which direction it would fall. Grayson joined her a moment later. He didn't speak right away. They're starting to understand, he said finally. They always do, Riley replied, right before the door closes. He nodded. Some of them are scared. They should be. That's not what I meant, he said quietly. They're scared because they thought they were doing the right thing, or at least the necessary thing. Riley looked at him then. Necessary for whom? Grayson didn't answer. That afternoon, the board reconvened with findings preliminary but firm. Immediate recommendations were issued, not dramatic, not punitive for the sake of spectacle, structural. Leadership suspensions pending further review, mandatory retraining under external oversight, reporting channels removed from local command influence, counseling services expanded and protected. Real change required infrastructure, not slogans. Riley felt the weight lift slightly, not because it was over, but because it was no longer fragile. Later, as the sun dipped low, she walked the perimeter again, the same path she'd taken nights earlier when the base had felt hostile and closed. Now it felt alert, awake, not healed, but aware. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this one longer. My transfer request was denied twice. I thought I was the problem. I was, thank you. Riley stopped walking. Read it again. The words carried more weight than any commendation ever had. She typed back slowly. You were never the problem. She didn't add anything else. She didn't need to. That night the final confrontation came, not physical, not dramatic, but sharp in its own way. Colonel Keating requested a private meeting. Riley arrived on time, as always. He looked different now, less defensive, more tired, the kind of tired that came from seeing something clearly for the first time and realizing how long it had been missed. I won't pretend this has been easy, he said, or that I handled everything right. Riley remained standing. Acknowledgement matters, but action matters more. He nodded. I failed to see the system as a weapon. So did most people, Riley said, because it wasn't pointed at them. Keating sighed. The board's recommendations will stand, fully. They should. He hesitated. When you leave, this place will remember you. Riley considered that. I don't need to be remembered, I need the changes to be. He studied her for a moment. You don't think of yourself as a hero. No, she said, I think of myself as a correction. That seemed to settle something in him. When Riley left his office for the last time, she didn't feel triumph. She felt closure, the kind that didn't erase damage but prevented its repetition. The following morning, she packed her duffel. Same bag, same routine, nothing ceremonial. As she walked toward the transport, a small group of women stood near the edge of the lot, not in formation, not waiting for permission, just present. One of them met her eyes and nodded. Another straightened her shoulders. A third simply watched, steady and unafraid. Riley returned the nod. That was enough. As the vehicle pulled away, the base shrank behind her. Buildings receded. Fences blurred. The place would continue without her, as it should. Systems weren't meant to depend on individuals. But individuals could start corrections. Riley leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes briefly. She thought about how power had tried to assert itself that night in the hallway, how it had relied on silence, isolation, and assumption, and how quickly it had collapsed under exposure. Not because she was stronger, but because truth was. Sometimes justice didn't arrive with force. Sometimes it arrived with patience, with documentation, with the refusal to look away. And sometimes dignity didn't ask to be defended. It simply stood its ground. One part remained. The aftermath. The quiet proof that change had taken root. And Riley intended to see that too. Why did the silence feel different once she was gone? Riley noticed it from the road, miles away from the base, as the transport rolled through terrain that looked like everywhere and nowhere at once. The world outside the window moved on without ceremony. No signal flare marked the end of her assignment. No call came asking her to stay. That was how it was supposed to be. Systems that depended on a single person hadn't really changed. Still, the quiet lingered. It followed her through the handoff briefing at the next stop, through the routine questions, through the nods that acknowledged her clearance without curiosity. She answered what was asked, nothing more, nothing less. She slept lightly that night, the way she always did when a mission closed, not because she was restless, but because endings had a way of reopening doors in the mind. Back on the base she'd left behind, the silence worked differently. It didn't press down anymore, it spread out. Morning formations resumed their rhythm, training schedules filled in, maintenance logs updated on time. The recovery wing lights stayed bright, cameras steady, locks new and unmistakably functional. People noticed these things without being told to notice them. Awareness became a habit. The first month passed with no headlines. That mattered. The second month brought small signs that were easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. A unit leader pulled from rotation after a retaliatory comment surfaced. A training instructor corrected a joke before it landed. An informal complaint redirected, properly, into a formal channel without drama or delay. The system didn't heal overnight, but it stopped bleeding. One afternoon, a young corporal stood outside the admin building, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and steady. She'd just finished telling her sister to apply, not because it was safe, because it was becoming safer, because someone had proven that silence wasn't the price of service. The difference wasn't loud. It never was. Riley learned about it all the same way she learned about most outcomes, indirectly. A line in a report, a note from an investigator, A quiet update slid across a table during a different assignment in a different place. "Your case changed procedure," someone said once almost casually. Riley nodded. Procedure was overdue. They didn't ask her how it felt. She didn't offer. On her next base visit weeks later, she walked past a wall where new guidance had been posted. Clear language, direct pathways, consequences written plainly. No euphemisms, no gray zones pretending to be neutral. She stood there for a moment, longer than necessary. Not pride. Recognition. She moved on. Late one evening, after another long day of briefings and careful listening, Riley found herself alone in a quiet room with a single window. The sky beyond it was dark, scattered with distant lights. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the fatigue she'd kept at bay. It settled into her shoulders, her hands, her breath. She thought about the first night again, the hallway, the certainty that had filled it before collapsing, how quickly power dissolved when it realized it had been seen. She thought about how many times she'd walked into places like that, not always as herself, sometimes as a name on a roster, sometimes as a silhouette at the edge of a room, sometimes as the last line between harm and accountability. She wondered briefly how many women she'd never meet had benefited from the work. How many never needed to file a report because the environment had shifted just enough. That was the strange thing about correction. You rarely saw its full shape. Her phone buzzed softly. An unfamiliar number, a short message. "We reopened my case. It didn't disappear this time." Riley stared at the screen, read it twice, then once more. She typed back slowly. "Good, it shouldn't have." She set the phone aside and lay back, eyes on the ceiling. For the first time in days, sleep came easily. Weeks later, the official findings were released, redacted, dry, unemotional, the kind of document that never trended, never sparked debate, never satisfied anyone looking for spectacle. But inside it were quiet victories. Language that mattered, policies rewritten, oversight reassigned, authority redistributed so it couldn't pool in dark corners anymore, accountability made boring, procedural, unavoidable. The people who had tried to turn silence into permission faced consequences that followed them, not loudly but permanently. Records updated, paths narrowed, options limited by truth. Not vengeance. Justice. Riley read the report once, then closed it. She didn't keep copies. Her work was never about trophies. On her last day at that assignment, she walked past a group of new arrivals unloading gear. One of them, a young woman with a duffel almost too big for her frame, caught Riley's eye and hesitated. "Ma'am," she said softly. Riley stopped. "Yes. I just wanted to say, I heard about what you did." Riley studied her face, the mixture of nerves and determination, the hope wrapped tightly around caution. "I didn't do it alone," Riley said. The woman nodded, "Still, thank you." Riley considered her for a moment, then said, "Take care of yourself, and take care of each other." The woman smiled, not wide, real. As Riley walked away, she felt something loosen inside her chest, not because she was done, but because the work no longer belonged to her alone. That was how it was supposed to be. Years later, people would misremember the story. They always did. They would sharpen it, simplify it, turn it into something louder than it had been. A confrontation, a takedown, a legend. Riley never corrected them. Because the truth was quieter. The truth was that change didn't begin with a fight. It began with someone refusing to look away. With someone patient enough to document instead of explode. With someone willing to stand still while a system revealed itself. Power had tried to take something that night. It failed. Not because it met greater force, but because it met clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It exposes. Sometimes dignity doesn't beg. Sometimes it doesn't even speak. Sometimes it waits. And when it acts, it doesn't just defend itself. It leaves the door open behind it, so no one else ever has to walk into that hallway